Hi, everyone. My name is Colin Zima. I'm a director of product strategy at Google Cloud as part of Looker. And we're here to talk about building data products. And specifically, we're here to talk about building products that go beyond the typical dashboard experience and actually creating new revenue streams with intelligent apps. I'm joined by Max Abouchar from Spire, a customer of ours, who's going to talk a little bit about the types of data that they're collecting and the types of applications that they're actually building that are powered by Google Cloud and powered by the data. So, Max, could you tell us a little bit about what you do at Spire and give us a quick overview of Spire as well?
Of course. Thanks, Colin. Yeah, so like Colin mentioned, I work at Spire Global as a product manager, specifically in the maritime business unit. Spire is a company that operates 112, soon to be 114 orbiting nano satellites. These satellites are recording all different radio signals. Our three primary radio signals we're recording are AIS, which is a maritime radio frequency giving vessel positions and destination information. ADS-B, which is similar but for airplanes, so positional and destination information for airplanes, and then GNSS radio occultation, which is essentially measuring the way that GPS signals are refracted through the atmosphere, and that gives us an extremely good look at what the atmosphere makeup is like, which allows us to build an extremely accurate weather model. So we offer maritime vessel tracking, aviation, target tracking, and then weather forecasting as well. And these three products together, they can be separate as an API. We're giving data streaming right from satellites to customers via APIs. But we will be talking a lot about sort of the analytical applications that I'm working on specifically in the maritime business unit to help have customers make sense of some radio signal we're recording from space. We're able to make an intelligent maritime application.
Yeah, perfect. So, you guys obviously are collecting a lot of really interesting data. I was hoping you could actually show me a little bit of that application that you built and kind of talk us through the types of products that you're building.
Yeah, of course. So we'll get into a demo, but I want to stress that a lot of the back end of this is being built with Google Cloud products. Specifically, Looker and BigQuery are two of the biggest products we're using. But yeah, let's get into a demo. Hello everyone, today I'm going to give you a quick overview on some of the data and products Spire Maritime is leveraging through our Spire Bridge portal. So here I'm just logging in as a maritime sales user, which will have no customer data for us to show, but I want to highlight that on this front page, users can see their usage on our two most popular APIs, which is being driven from BigQuery is where logging is stored, and then Looker is creating a aggregation of this or calling an aggregation, which is then fed into a charting library. But the most important thing I want to show is our analytics tab, where we have 4 standard dashboards that are templates at this point, but these can easily be expanded through adding more dashboards in Looker and then just allowing the embedding into our portal. So we'll start with the global dashboard and show kind of a macro to micro journey for Spire Maritime data. As we can see, there are these initial KPIs at the top: number of port events, active vessels, the 7-day average steaming speed of vessels. We're getting a map of where these events are taking place: 3,000 for the US, 18,000 for China. We're seeing a breakdown on the AAS ship type, which is a transponder ship type, and then our enhanced vessels database ship type, which gets a bit more precise. We can see the average import time for various popular ports, and then an actual table view of everything. So all of this data is being derived from AIS positions and updates that are collected via our satellites, and then we make events-driven data for the port events you're seeing here. And then through Looker, we're able to drill into that information. We could even download the data directly, or we could link right to a dashboard. So I'm clicking on the US and we can go directly to a US dashboard. This would work for any country as it's filtered through. We can see the average import time, the ship type breakdown, where these events are happening, the events as a stacked bar chart of what type of ships are there. So we can see a place like Newark has a lot of container ships and unknowns, which are mostly personal craft, compared to a place like Houston, which has a lot of chemical tankers, and fewer container ships. And then we see how long each vessel is spending in each port compared to the previous 7 days. And again, more tabular information. But again, we can click and drill down even further. So if I was interested in Newark, New Jersey, click on that, and I'm brought to a dashboard just for Newark, where I can see the average import time, ship type breakdown, and the deadweight tonnage. So in Newark, we can see mostly from here the deadweight tonnage. So the sum of the capacity of vessels passing through that port increased dramatically recently. And down below, we see the actual events themselves. And this is where you can really see the granularity of our maritime data. So here are the events. A vessel by the name of Santa Vanessa with a deadweight tonnage of 72,000 arrived in Newark at 2100 UTC. But if I was interested in that vessel, I could click on the IMO number, which is the International Maritime Organization number, and see the route itself. And this one is quite interesting in that it just arrived at Newark. It was previously in Bremerhaven, then Rotterdam again, London, and Las Palmas. So we can see that it came up the west coast of Europe, where it was taking on cargo. We can tell that by the draft increasing, where it took on cargo in Germany and is now exporting it to the US. We can see that draft as a graph down below. And leveraging Looker, we can do things like set alerts for some of this. We can schedule deliveries, alerts. And yeah, all this data is being fed into our database in real time. So all of it is very quickly available in these dashboards for our customers to use. Hopefully this spurred some ideas from anyone watching, and thanks for listening.
Thanks for that demo, Max. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about what you've built and sort of how you got there. So I was hoping first, you mentioned that you've got these satellites collecting a lot of raw data. And I know that early in your sort of product lifecycle, a lot of the products that you were delivering were raw data sets. So API feeds, really raw versions of that satellite data. And since you've expanded to more productized solutions and data applications, we like to call them, but sort of what helped you understand what your customer needed and what guided you down that path?
Yeah, so primarily what we saw is that we were making this data available from our satellites via APIs, but it was really only accessible to technical people or industry experts. So either they were technical enough to make use of just an API that was exposing data, or they were already an expert in a particular industry like maritime. So they knew exactly what they were looking for in an AIS signal to make use of their own application, their own business case. So what we saw was we were leaving out a large amount of people that wanted access to maritime data, but didn't necessarily know what AIS was or even what an API was. So we built these applications to make the data a lot more accessible and kind of give some basic, some fundamental aggregations and filtering and analytical add-ons that a lot of our customers were already doing, but was very simple for us to add as well.
So I guess for folks that are sitting on data that might have value, how did you like do you think you traced the right path there? Would you recommend that folks start with sort of raw APIs and then upgrade into applications, or should folks be thinking about starting with sort of these analytical products before they're getting into distributing raw data, or do you kind of always need both?
I think starting with the raw data is certainly a very valuable path in that you can expose just the raw data you have underneath. You don't need to do anything to begin with. You can get that initial feedback from customers and you can experiment in that industry and find what different sorts of customers need. And for us, the biggest thing was we knew, we had our customer segments very fleshed out, but we wanted to expose what data we did have to more people, which analytics allowed us to do.
Yep, makes perfect sense. So I guess as a follow-on to that, how do you guys think about adding intelligence to your application? So obviously you've got sort of this raw version of the data, and then you've got sort of a slightly cleaner version of the data, and even sort of like a visual application. What about sort of predictive and sort of deeper insight and things like that? Like, was that part of the original app, or is that something that you're continuing to add? How should someone be thinking about sort of higher order intelligence?
Yeah, it's something we're continuing to add. So we, um, dealing with satellites and dealing with the amount of data we already are, we had quite a bit of predictive capabilities already built in house. So the goal with this was to be able to productize that. If we had a data science team internally that could make a lot of predictive models, that could predict positions of vessels. I mean, we're obviously doing that with weather forecasting. Um, Having an application makes those analytical and predictive products a lot more accessible.
Yeah, and I guess when you shifted from this sort of API focused strategy, and obviously you still have a lot of that, but to a more sort of application style strategy, how did that change the go to market for your products? Like, did you have to shift the way that you sort of talked about them or sold them?
Well, we, now have visualizations of our product. So that was definitely a barrier when you're selling APIs is what do you show people? Is it a JSON response that people are really looking to buy? Um, so now we have graphs and maps and all sorts of different things that really help sell it and help people visualize what is possible. Um, so just bright colors from Looker are excellent at allowing people to come up with their own analytics and ideas that they would want to do on top of our data, or maybe um, in in a co-development operation with us.
So, Max, we kind of talked through what you're building. I want to talk a little bit about how you are building this and sort of the process that you went through. So, um, you obviously have these data sets that are proprietary and sort of well understood. In terms of actually building these applications, what did you consider in terms of partnering versus building things yourself, and sort of how did you go through that decision? And then we'll talk a little bit about sort of how you actually went and built those things after you made that decision.
Sure. Yeah, so a lot of our thought process revolved around what resources would be available. So, we have a large amount of data I'm hesitant to use the word big data because that's such a buzzword nowadays. But if you can imagine, 112 satellites are collecting quite a bit of data, and then we're doing a lot of processing on top of that. Um, so we had these APIs, which are very different than building an application or building a platform, really, to make that data accessible. So in wanting to build something like that, we wanted it as custom as possible. We wanted something that you looked at and it said Spire. It had our color scheme. It was linked to all of our different data sets. But we also knew where our expertise is more in spacecraft engineering and API development, not necessarily in data or productizing data visualization. If we have a lot of people on our team that can make something very pretty in Matplotlib, but we want those graphs, those numbers, that analysis accessible to people. And Looker gave us a really good tool to do that, where we had our analytics that we were already building, we could easily expose through Looker, which allowed customers to access that in a much more productized way than they were before.
Makes perfect sense. I guess when you're thinking about sort of the level of customization in your application, sort of how would you frame how someone should think about just sort of dropping a bunch of dashboards into a portal, or sort of building more custom, more workflowed experience? Like, do you need to do both of those things, or did you kind of start in one and try to create a path to the other? How did you think about that?
Yeah, so I think the workflow is certainly the most important because with a workflow, you can build, as many dashboards as you want. Um, we definitely thought of that, of making sure it was scalable, it was efficient to make customizations. If a customer came to us and said, I like this, but I want to do something totally different because their use case is different than something we considered, we want to be open to that. We don't want to have one customer in mind that we're thinking of and we go after. We want to be as flexible as really our data is. I mean, Spire is collecting three very different primary data sets. We want to be flexible because we're making that data available to people in all sorts of different industries, from logistics to finance to operations to governments. The customer list is really quite diverse. So we want to be, our platform wants to be as diverse as our customer list.
And I guess in terms of timeline, what kind of timeline should someone expect that has a decent data set that wants to sort of applicationize it for a customer?
Yeah. So, I mean, we were pretty quick and we were pretty fortunate to work with a lot of great partners to make our data very accessible. Going from a data warehouse to, or a data lake, to having an analytical product in maybe only 3 months. Um, so I think it can be very quick, but then the important part is, once you have this MVP, something that is analytical, is visual, being able to iterate on top of that. So that was certainly the biggest emphasis on preparing for this, was not in the application building itself, but on being flexible.
Yeah. So I mean, I'd love to hear about that a little bit. How were you actually exposing it to customers? Like, did you have a small set that you were sort of building towards, or did you sort of build a product and then just hand it to them and try to get feedback? Like, how did you actually approach that?
Yeah, so all of our maritime data specifically is in BigQuery. We were big users of BigQuery in the maritime business unit and doing a lot of cool analytical, graphs, charts, derivations of the data. We were going from just AAS, which is positions of vessels, to event-driven data like recognizing when a vessel arrives in an anchorage, which anchorage that is, how long it took to go from that anchorage to the port, to the terminal, and then out again. And then tracking that history. So knowing vessels that are going to Singapore often, or people who are often doing a Shanghai to Long Beach transit, isolating those vessels. So we were doing a lot of that sort of ad hoc on BigQuery, kind of in a pre-sales application to show customers what is possible with our data. And that kind of led us down the road of, we have all this data in BigQuery. It's very quick. We could make these tables and things much more visible and flexible to our customers, and allow them the ability to do that sort of filtering we were doing in-house. So Looker integrating, obviously, with BigQuery, we were able to put all those complex queries we had already written to perform in-house, and productize them, and made them as a analytics and event-driven data on top of our data set, without really exposing the underlying radio signal to the customer who may not be interested in it.
No, I mean, I love this story because I think it almost seems like it seems obvious when you explain it, where it's like you've got this really raw data set, and then you turn it into like boats moving around and where they are and what they're doing. But I feel like it's such a perfect example of going from giving people data to giving people information about sort of the problem that they're actually trying to solve, which is like where the boats actually are and what they're doing.
There's a lot of current events that sort of made this, really gave a clear view on why we're doing this. So we were doing something called data stories, just with Spire, that if a current event happened that was related to maritime, whether it be a piracy issue or a delays in New York or icing somewhere, we were doing this analysis on our own to see how our radio signals are lining up with that, what extra information we can tell from it. And having this data then productized within Looker made that all so much faster. I can think of the most recent example to now is the Suez Canal, the Ever Given being stuck within the Suez Canal. You can instantly make a dashboard in hours of this happening to show the anchorages where boats are stacking up, how the delay times are going, just going straight up, how no one's transiting the Suez Canal. And you have these anchorages in Egypt and in the Mediterranean that are just stacking up with more and more ships. And then because we're a satellite operator and we're seeing the entire globe, we're seeing ships turn away from going through the Suez Canal and go all the way around Africa. And we're tracking them all the way through there, and we're able to do an analysis. Well, they added an extra 5 days, and that would be an equivalent of however many liters of fuel or kilograms of CO2. What was the cost benefit analysis of that? But they missed that Suez incident. And all that data was available within hours of what was actually happening, on the front page of newspapers.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's a good time. It was the perfect time to be a maritime data company for product marketing. So nice job there. So I guess to close it out, just wanted to give you the opportunity to sort of give the audience some takeaways in terms of sort of, for the folks out there thinking about building products for their own customers with data, I guess, like, what are the one or two things that you would leave them with?
Yeah, I think for one, the biggest thing is make sure you can do it yourself. Um, worry about productizing after you've figured out what you are going to productize. Um, certainly we went from having an API to having these analytics and event driven data. But we had to make those analytics and event driven data ad hoc and one off beforehand to kind of see what the feedback was, what customers are interested in. And then once we have that, you can very quickly scale that up with a lot of Google Cloud products.
Well, thanks for sharing the story. This has been great. And I guess if folks have follow up questions, uh, I'll have them ping you for some maritime data.
Yeah, pay attention to the Spire Data Stories webpage and add Spire to your Google search notifications.
Thanks again.